Welcome to Sizzle Fantasy Sports, the channel with the most sizzling hot fantasy takes and analysis, presented by your host, Gavin.
Rodgers clean pocket, throws the middle to Yates, Devontae, touchdown, and a dagger!
How's it going, you guys? Welcome back to the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and today I have my first bit of Dynasty content for you guys here in the 2021 offseason. I've got 10 players for you guys who I see either rising or falling in value based off of their 2020 performances, and players that I think are very crucial and interesting guys to look at here as we break down and get into the offseason. So obviously the playoffs are winding down, head coach hirings are going down here, and so there's a lot of interesting things that we can play into these scenarios. So if you guys are Dynasty players, welcome aboard the channel. I have a lot of great stuff I want to get into this offseason for you guys. And for those of you that are my redraft viewers from this past season, stick around, don't panic. There's a lot of content in here for you guys. And I also highly encourage you guys to join or start up your own Dynasty League because they are a lot of fun, a lot more in-depth. And if you are a huge football fan, this is something you guys will love. So we've got 10 guys up on the board today. 5 of them are going to be risers and 5 of them are going to be fallers. So let's not waste any time and let's get right into my first player. All right, the first player I want to talk about in today's video is Jonathan Taylor, the lead back for the Indianapolis Colts. And regardless if we're talking about Dynasty or redraft leagues, JT is 100% without a doubt a riser for the 2021 season. I think there's no question we see him go a lot higher than what he went at in 2020. I mean, depending on when you drafted your redraft leagues last season, Jonathan Taylor, if you drafted at the back end of July in really early redraft season, you might have been able to snatch him up for a late 4th, 5th, or maybe even creeping into the 6th round in lesser leagues. But JT, by the end of draft season, was all the way up in the 3rd round for some leagues or the early 4th. So JT 100% was a guy you were looking at as a really hopeful rookie, a guy you hoped could give you some league-winning potential. And he absolutely did that. Obviously, Marlon Mack had a season-ending injury week 1, which thrust Taylor right into the starting role in week 2 there. But going into this season, JT's got the starting job. Marlon Mack is an unrestricted free agent, and I fully expect the Colts to let Marlon Mack walk. So for Dynasty value, that is great for JT. I think this offseason, if you've got JT on your Dynasty squad, you're looking really good with a top 5 solid RB1. So JT, I love going into this year. Right now, we're looking at some ADPs. I think Jonathan Taylor is a very realistic mid-first round pick in both Dynasty and redraft this year. I mean, in redraft right now, he's going between the 5th and 8th pick in almost every mock draft I've seen. And then in redraft, rather, he is going right around the same spot. So I think that JT is right outside the bubble right now for that top 3 tier of running backs. I think that you've got Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, and Alvin Kamara up in that top group, and JT is just on the outside of that looking in. And for a guy the talent of Jonathan Taylor, he 100% can get there, but there are some major question marks on his team. Obviously, Phillip Rivers just retired a couple days ago, so we don't really know who the quarterback will be for the Colts in 2021, and obviously that is a huge part of play. But I mean, we saw Christian McCaffrey with Kyle Allen get it done and be the RB1 overall in 2019, so there's definitely some hope there. You don't have to have the best supporting cast in the world. I mean, a big loss for JT was also left tackle Anthony Costanzo. He also went into retirement, so there is some things working against JT, but also there is a lot of things working very well for him. Obviously, he's got Frank Reich as his head coach. He is a very talented and very intelligent offensive play caller as the head coach for that football team. And then obviously Ryan Kelly and Quentin Nelson on front blocking for Taylor. So I love a lot of things about JT's game. I'm a Wisconsin Badgers fan, a Wisconsin sports fan, and I loved what he did at Wisconsin. So JT, he gets my stamp of approval at every stop. I think he's a great talent. He's a great prospect. And for a guy in both Dynasty and Redraft, he has a ton of value this season and is one of my favorite running backs to talk about. So shifting gears here to a player I think might completely fall off the face of the earth in fantasy football terms this season is actually Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley, quick thing I want to stop here and just ask you guys. So I'm using Player Profiler right here. I just transitioned between Jonathan Taylor and Todd Gurley here on the website. Do you guys like this format of visual aid, I guess if that's what you want to call it? I've been using this for quite some time now. I think once I started using it, I actually got a lot more approval for my videos, and you guys seem to be enjoying them a lot more because you had something to actually look at. But if there's a different site out there you guys know about that you'd rather see me use, I 100% am willing to try those out. But Todd Gurley is the top of the list for me in terms of guys I expect to just be night and day in terms of fantasy output. Todd Gurley in 2020 was actually not that good of a running back. He was really hiding behind his high touchdown count. Through the first 9 games of the season, Todd Gurley was a red zone machine. And just like he was last year for the Rams, he was pumping out touchdowns left and right. But when you dive into the numbers and look at his yardage totals, he was very, very, very disappointing last season. He only had 3 games with 63 or more rushing yards, and that's just not going to cut it. He only had 100-yard performance. So Todd Gurley, he really needs touchdowns to be productive. And at the end of the season, interim head coach Raheem Morris just said, you know what, Todd Gurley is not the best option to lead this backfield right now. And he actually got benched in favor of a 1-2 punch between Ito Smith and Brian Hill, who are not highly respected running backs throughout the league. I mean, they can get the job done, but obviously a player like Todd Gurley, who once was the caliber of a top 3 running back in the league and was feared by defenders, clearly showing a lot of drop-off there. I mean, Todd Gurley not seen in the same light even by his own coach. So Todd Gurley, I think, is a situational play. He signed a 1-year contract with the Falcons last offseason. I think there's a really great chance, you guys, that Todd Gurley is not an Atlanta Falcon next season, and he's not a starting running back, period. I mean, when we talk about the running back position, it's a position that I think has really become less and less valuable to NFL teams. We don't see guys play their entire career for one team anymore. We don't see guys be bell cows for an extended period of time or even more than one contract. It's really unlikely that you ever see that happen. I mean, that's why these running backs aren't getting those second contracts. We're seeing teams regret it. I mean, Todd Gurley got his second contract with the Rams, and right now, well, obviously they bailed on him and chose to eat the dead money over keeping him on the team. Obviously, he's got the arthritis in his knee that's working against him. So for a guy who was a 3rd and 4th round pick in both redraft and dynasty last year, we don't know the redraft ADPs right now. I can project what he might be. I think he might not even be a top 10 round pick, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, I don't think he's going to go somewhere else and be a starter or a lead back for a football team. He's probably going to have to be a situational play. I mean, I think Todd Gurley's a flex play next year, if I'm being completely honest, or a low-level RB2 at best. I think really he might only be viable in standard leagues where touchdowns can really swing the outcome of performances. And, you know, like I said, Todd Gurley, I don't know how much of a market there is for him next season. I think with his dynasty value right now, he was going, like I said, 3rd, 4th round last season. Right now, he's creeping back into the 8th and 9th rounds. So he's definitely not a guy who has long-term production in sight. I mean, I think he might be out of the league within a year or two, unfortunately. And this is coming from a guy who was one of Todd Gurley's top supporters. I loved the guy. I thought he was an extremely great talent, and I loved watching what he could do, especially in that Super Bowl run year. I thought it was just amazing, the things that he was doing. And then all of a sudden, this arthritis pops up, and C.J. Anderson is the saving grace for that Rams football team. So Todd Gurley, I'm a huge fan of the guy. He's not the same player he once was. I think he's taking a huge blow in fantasy this season. And right now his ADP in Dynasty is reflecting that, and I certainly expect him to fall way down depending on his landing spot in free agency, like I said, because I don't expect the Falcons to resign him. The last point I just wanted to get in there, I started to talk about it and then went off on a bit of a tangent, is with the running back position, there's more talent at the running back position than there is jobs on the market available and looking for a top running back. And that's part of the reason I don't think Todd Gurley gets a top role. So while Todd Gurley might be a talented NFL running back, he doesn't have bell cow numbers and touches left in him anymore. Like I said, he can find that role where he's just a goal line monster and eats up touchdowns and is really good in standard leagues. But in a true PPR format, I don't see Todd Gurley having much value this season. or even in half PPR. So I think there's definitely a lot of red flags with Todd this season and a lot of reasons to move him down board. So shifting back over to some guys I think are going to increase in value this season. I think that other than JT, we might not see someone have as large of a spike as Justin Jefferson will this year. I think Justin Jefferson is, quite honestly, in my opinion, on pace to be a top 5 receiver as early as next season. I mean, that might be a bit drastic, but the way this guy runs routes, the way he plays the game, it's truly like an art form. I watch him as a Green Bay Packer fan. I absolutely despise the Minnesota Vikings, and Justin Jefferson, I can't not root for him. The one thing that would turn me off to him a little bit is if he got a loudmouth and were to become a diva receiver like Stephon Diggs. But right now, just looking at the game that Justin Jefferson plays, it is a exceptional level. And I think that it's really hard to cover him. I mean, we saw him pretty much emerge into that number 1 spot as the season wound down. He overtook Adam Thielen in targets. He was honestly more productive than Thielen outside of scoring touchdowns. And for a rookie to have 1,400 yards is insane. And Kirk Cousins is good enough to get the job done for him. So I love Justin Jefferson coming into 2021. In startup dynasty leagues right now, he is going at the very top of the second round. I've seen him go at the 2-1 and 2-2 every single time I've done a mock draft for dynasty. So Justin Jefferson clearly is being valued highly in fantasy football for this up and coming season. I think, if we think about guys like DK Metcalf, AJ Brown from last season, those rookies who were very impressive in that campaign and came back and were honestly maybe even a little bit better, I think Justin Jefferson falls into that role. Maybe in redraft, he's a early to mid 3rd round pick, and I think it's an absolute steal and a guy that could go out there and win your league if he increases his upside. Let's say scores some more touchdowns. He was very quiet to start the season off, and he just went crazy once he got the chance to start and be productive in that Vikings offense. So the sky's the limit for Justin Jefferson, in my opinion. And I think that he is one of the most interesting guys to look at for fantasy this up and coming year. And I can't wait to dive into him even more and break him down on some future videos. But moving along back into some guys I see falling in value this year. Aaron Jones, this one pains me. I am a diehard Packer fan, and I just don't see a avenue where the Packers bring Aaron Jones back onto the roster in 2021. I love Aaron Jones just as much as the next Packer fan does, but like I said, I just don't see a way we get this deal done. Reportedly, there was an offer out there, a top 5 running back contract at the moment for Jones. Although there was little guarantees reportedly in that deal, he would have had the upside and potential to get paid top 5 running back numbers. And he actually fired his agent and declined the offer. So Aaron Jones, I think he's looking to be the top dog. I don't think he deserves it. I don't think he's better than Kamara. I don't think he's better than CMC. I don't think he's better than Dalvin Cook. There's probably even a couple other names I could toss in there. But Aaron Jones, I'd love to have him back on Green Bay. But just some extra football information for you guys outside of fantasy. We're $22 million over the cap, or at least projected to be there once the season ends. And we still have guys like Corey Linsley. It's much harder to find an elite level all-pro offensive lineman. And Robert Tonyan, who is a breakout tight end for us. It's probably more difficult to find an elite level receiving tight end than it is to find a running back. We've already got Jamal Williams, who's also a free agent, and AJ Dillon that we could work with for much cheaper prices. So, like I said, I think it's highly unlikely we see Aaron Jones in a Green Bay Packers uniform next season. And that added element of uncertainty is really what lowers him on my list for me and makes him a guy who I see falling off a bit in fantasy this year. Finished as RB5 this year, I believe, and was very explosive, very efficient. Used a bit more in a committee-style offense in Green Bay than he was in 2019, where him and McCaffrey were going at it for that RB1 spot. But I still think Aaron Jones is highly talented and could be a top 5 running back. He just needs to land in a perfect situation for him and one of those few landing spots where he could truly take over the dominant hand in that offense. So Aaron Jones, he's a great receiver. He's a great rusher. I think he just needs to find the right team for him. I wish it could be Green Bay, because then we'd at least know what to expect from him going into next season. But until free agency is over, until he either finds a new team or somehow finds a deal with the Packers, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of reason to move him down draft boards, and especially in dynasty leagues, there's a lot of reason to be concerned there. So going into the other side of things here, my number 3 player I see rising in value in 2021 is DeAndre Swift, the Detroit Lions second-year running back. And I have a lot of good things to say about DeAndre Swift. I loved what he did at Georgia. I thought in the opportunities he got from Detroit this season, he was exceptional. He's one of my favorite players after the catch in the league. And I think when we're talking about a running back, that speaks volume to what he can do from a dynamic standpoint. And I preached all season long, I love my running backs to start dynamic and give me value in the receiving game, because for fantasy football, a reception is worth twice as much as a rushing attempt. So, I mean, DeAndre Swift, for a guy who can catch 10-12 passes a game out of the backfield, I think he adds a huge element in PPR leagues. And even in half PPR leagues, I think he can even do some things in standard. I was surprised to see him get some goal line work against some tough running defenses this season. Obviously, Swift was banged up at times, dealt with some injuries, but I think this is a guy who you might be able to get for a lower price because of those injuries and the lack of consistent play time we saw him get, because obviously he was named the starter, was exceptional, but then had a concussion and wasn't able to be out there on the field for the rest of the season like he was supposed to be. So I think in 2021, we're going to see him take over a little bit. I think he might be a mid-third round pick in redraft leagues. He's going at the back end of the first round, early second in dynasty startups. He definitely is carrying a lot of value, and people are noticing that. And I think that if, like I said, if you can get him in that early mid-third round, it's a steal, and he could turn into an RB1 league winner for you guys. So I love DeAndre Swift this year. The one question mark I have is with Dan Campbell, the recent head coaching hire with DeAndre Swift and that Lions team. I wonder if they're going to tear down and just try to rebuild from scratch, if they're going to try and move off Matt Stafford, or if they're going to stick with the process and keep building as they have been over the last few years here. So I'm a little bit concerned. I don't know too much about Dan Campbell. He was the assistant head coach to Sean Payton over there in New Orleans, but he was also the tight ends coach. So he comes from an offensive background, clearly. Let's hope he knows what he's doing, and he could really make or break DeAndre Swift's season depending on how he constructs that football team and how he coaches things up there in Detroit. So my next guy, this one is another one. It hurts me, but Julio Jones, I have to project as a guy who's going to fall in value here in 2021. And I'm not even so sure he deserves it. I mean, Julio had a hamstring all season long, banged up with injuries, underproduced based off of what we've seen Julio do in the past. And I still, by all means, love Julio Jones. But coming into his age 32 season here, we know Julio is on the down spiral here. I don't think he's just going to fall off a cliff and be terrible, but I do think we will see Julio Jones, especially in redraft leagues, fall down into the mid-third round possibly. I mean, the emergence of Calvin Ridley is also a huge knock against him. I think that had Julio been the only option there in Atlanta, that gives the Falcons not too much breathing room where they kind of have to stick with him and give him the lion's share of targets. But, you know, as long as Matt Ryan is still there, he is going to be a feature part of the offense. He is still one of the top 10 most talented wide receivers in the National Football League. There's no question about that. Even at that age 32, he is still a great talent and a great player. I just question his ability to stay on the field for 16 games. Obviously, every game you miss is big for fantasy because every game counts. You need to get into the postseason. You need to win every game once you get there. And Julio just wasn't available at big moments of this season. So I expect his ADP to be down this year in redraft. And for Dynasty, obviously, long-term projections like I talked about here in this video, or before the video rather, I think that we're seeing this being reflected in his Dynasty ADP. Last year, he was a late second rounder in startup leagues. This year, he's looking at more of a mid-fifth round. So obviously, we're seeing a couple round drop-off there. He was even going in the early third round in some startup leagues last season, but Like I said, a couple round drop off here, maybe even 2.5 rounds. But if you're looking for a 1-year rental for a guy that could be a championship piece on a team, I still definitely think Julio is worth the risk and can definitely, put up those numbers that we are accustomed to seeing. But there is more risk than there's ever been with Julio Jones, and for that reason, he makes my falling list. Going back over to some risers, I've got J.K. Dobbins of the Baltimore Ravens. J.K. is one of my favorite running backs from last year's draft class. I think that he is one of the most talented, in my opinion, should have been the first running back off the board last season. I wasn't a big fan of the Clyde Edwards-Helaire pick. I thought that he seemed like more of a gadget piece to me than a true franchise running back. J.K. Dobbins to me was the most physical downhill guy who, when hits the open field, is a burner and is gone. I talked about earlier in the video, I'm a Wisconsin Badgers fan, and J.K. Dobbins terrorized my defense for every single year he was with Ohio State. I mean, Ohio State whoops up on us regardless, but J.K. Dobbins was a big part of that. I remember his true freshman year. He ran wild all over our top-ranked defense when we were trying to get into the college football playoff. And he said, no thanks, try again next year, and just completely derailed us. So J.K. Dobbins with the Baltimore Ravens, I think one of the most dominant rushing attacks in the National Football League, has a great opportunity to rise not only in redraft but in Dynasty as well. J.K. Dobbins in my startup Dynasty league last season was, I believe, either a 4th or a 5th round pick. I don't remember what his ADP was at last year, but I certainly know what it's at this year. Right now, he is going in the early to mid 2nd round of Dynasty startups, and I expect that to be very, very similar in redraft. I think he'll be a mid to late 2nd, no later than the early 3rd round in redraft leagues, because with Mark Ingram being released, I think almost every football fan who keeps up to date with contracts and stuff saw this coming. Mark Ingram was not going to be part of the team last year or this coming year. I even projected that way back last summer when they picked Dobbins. So JK this year, like I said, I was raving about his talent. I love what he can do as a pure running back. I think he's also very versatile. I think him and Lamar Jackson really could give some defenses some headaches here with the explosion they both have. You don't know on the option who's got it, and you got to pay attention to both of them because they can both be gone in a flash. So I really like him this year. I think J.K. Dobbins, if we could see him see an uptick in the rushing attempts or the total touches he got as the starter this year, that would be great because we're looking at around, 13 to 15 touches per week. That's nice, but not quite that elite workhorse running back 1 numbers. Obviously, I think Lamar kind of raids some of his touches because obviously he is the best ground game quarterback in the National Football League. But J.K. Dobbins is a beast in his own right. He's going to have a really, really great ceiling because if he finds the end zone, and we saw him do so multiple times where he got in the end zone on multiple occasions, added in with the fact that he is explosive and can break away plays, Dobbins should be in for a big year. So I love JK. I think that especially with the lightened load in his rookie season, he should be in for a fresh and hot start here in 2021. So into another guy who I am not a fan of whatsoever in fantasy is James Conner, currently of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He is a free agent this offseason, so we could definitely see James Conner on the move here. Almost 26 years old. Obviously, he's dealt with some not so great health issues and concerns in his career, but he's battled through them. But nonetheless, James Conner was kind of a fantasy disappointment this year. Obviously, he was the hero when Le'Veon Bell went out. He stepped up, filled the void, and was a great RB1 for teams off the waiver wire that year and was one of the fantasy MVPs, I would add, that season. But things have changed in Pittsburgh. That line is not quite as good at blocking as they once were in the ground game. Obviously, they've gotten older. They've lost some pieces along the way. And this season, James Conner and that Pittsburgh offense were pretty miserable. I mean, the Steelers had no ground game whatsoever. It was evident in play calling. They did not believe in what they were doing. And it was kind of hard to watch from a football perspective, or at least a fan's perspective. I mean, they were throwing out routes and arrow routes every single play. It was great for Deontay Johnson in PPR, who I had in almost all my leagues, but James Conner, unless he scored a touchdown, was a dud every week. So The Steelers in 2021, who knows what we're going to see with Ben Roethlisberger. I think we'll see him back for another year, but who knows? I mean, he cried after the playoff loss to the Browns. Maybe he's thinking about calling it quits. I know, obviously, he's not the most fit quarterback in the league, but I could really see the Steelers shaking things up here. James Conner was not efficient this year. I could see head coach Mike Tomlin wanting a fresh start, a more explosive runner, someone that this team can really lay their hats on at the end of the day. I don't think James Conner is that guy anymore. I think he goes to a new team. I personally, in the backfield right now, I really like Anthony McFarland. He's really, really explosive. The only thing that worries me a bit is he's a little bit small in stature, so I think there is the possibility that cold weather, Pittsburgh, Tomlin might want to go with a heavier set power back who also has some burst in the open field. In that case, I think Najee Harris could be a guy to keep your eye on in the draft. But James Conner, nonetheless, if he's a Steeler or not a Steeler, he is not going to be picked as high as he was this past season. He was in that high-end RB2 range, maybe even for some leagues, some draft boards, a low-end RB1. He's not going to be in that conversation at all. He's a mid to low-end RB2 right now. His Dynasty ADP is plummeted to the 7th round, which is not great. I mean, he's just barely above Todd Gurley by a round right now, and Todd Gurley I'm not interested in whatsoever. So I think James Conner need to stay away from him. I don't like what he's going to do this season, and I think there's just too many risks and little reward. And then my last player up here that I see as a riser, obviously there is numerous more risers than this. These are just the guys I wanted to talk about here in this first Dynasty episode. 100% I'm going to be diving into a ton more guys and talking about tons of fantasy all offseason long with you guys. I finally got a new camera, so I was actually loaning out a camera from a friend of mine, and I returned it, and I bought my own camera, and I had tons of issues with it. I actually ended up returning the first one, going out and buying a second camera, and then finally, after numerous attempts of recording and fixing all the settings in this camera, I've got this down. So we're going to be cranking out videos 3-4 times a week here and getting you guys set up for 2021 fantasy. So Justin Herbert, my last riser in today's video. I think Justin Herbert is a league-winning pick next year. Quarterbacks in fantasy football, in my opinion, are extremely overvalued, and the top-end guys are picked far too soon in the draft in regards to the actual value and added bonus to your outcome of or your chances of winnings, I should say. Quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, at times in his career, Aaron Rodgers, Peyton Manning, these guys have all had outstanding fantasy performances and been great during their fantasy seasons. But the only real time that you get top-end value out of those picks is when you drafted them while they were still a quote-unquote sleeper, or when their ADP wasn't the mid-second round like Lamar and Patrick Mahomes were last year. Those are exceptional talents. They're great players. But when you pick a quarterback that early, you are limiting your amount of upside you have at the running back and wide receiver position, heck, even tight end. So I like picking the quarterbacks that are very, very talented and very, very consistent, but whose ADPs are a lot more friendly. I think Justin Herbert is that guy this year. I think that Aaron Rodgers, Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Russell Wilson, just off the top of my head, there's 6 quarterbacks right there. I think all 6 of those guys go before Justin Herbert does this up-and-coming season. I'll try to think here for another second if I can get another guy up there, but those maybe even Tom Brady. I could see Tom Brady going before Justin Herbert. Those are all guys that are going to go before Justin Herbert, and I would not be shocked if produced the exact same numbers as him. Herbert, I think you can get for a mid-round pick in fantasy this year. Obviously, a huge riser for a guy who was probably undrafted in almost every fantasy league outside of Dynasty. And in my startup Dynasty league, he was a pick in the teen rounds. I think he was a 12th round pick and ended up going on someone's taxi squad. If you guys are unfamiliar with taxi squads, I'll make a video on that some other time. But Justin Herbert, coming out of college out of Oregon, I didn't like him at all. I didn't project him to be an exceptional talent whatsoever. I thought he was going to be a bust. I was a Herbert hater, you could say. but he absolutely knocked my socks off. This guy was amazing from his first snap all the way through the end of the season. I remember watching a Thursday night game while I was at work, and just watching the throws and the angles he was making. This guy is a huge player. He's got all the talent, all the intangibles, and I think he can make every throw there is, and he has an extremely bright future. So Justin Herbert this year, I think for a quarterback, a young quarterback who's very athletic as well, he can scramble if he wants to. He's tied to Keenan Allen. He's tied to Hunter Henry. Who knows? They might bring Mike Williams back. He's got Austin Eckler out of the backfield. He has offensive weapons, and he has the talent to get it done. He's going to go in the mid-rounds, so still a huge riser from that undrafted status last season, but he is going to give you incredible value. I expect he'll probably go somewhere around the 5th or 6th round in fantasy drafts. For redraft leagues right now in Dynasty, he's a 4th round pick, and usually in Dynasty, the redraft is a couple rounds later just because it overvalues young age opposed to what they give you right now. So Justin Herbert, I love what this guy is going to do in 2021. I think head coach Brandon Staley, a lot of people are worried about, the Chargers didn't go out and get Justin Herbert, an offensive coordinator or an offensive-minded head coach. And I actually thought that at first as well, and I actually read into it, and Brandon Staley was a offensive coach during his time as a coach at the collegiate level. So it's not like he can't mentor Justin Herbert. He definitely has something to add there. I think that when you look at the weapons, like I said, surrounding Herbert, this is a team that drafts well. I think they're one draft away from being a very competitive football team. That defense is really good. And those offensive weapons are good as well. They just need to upgrade the line a little bit. So getting a little bit off track here and besides the point. But all in all, Justin Herbert's phenomenal. I expect him to have a great season this year. I think that he'll be one of the best players and one of the most valuable players coming up here in this next fantasy season. So Justin Herbert caps off my risers list for this first video here. And then capping off my guys who I think are going to depreciate in value. This one's a bit sad for me. Zach Ertz of the Philadelphia Eagles. I was a huge Zach Ertz fan. I had Zach Ertz on my fantasy team when I won my biggest championship of my fantasy career, if you want to say that. He was a part of my big three, led by, I had Melvin Gordon back in 2018, DeAndre Hopkins, Deshaun Watson, and Zach Ertz were a part of that crew, and those guys all had exceptional seasons, and it was my biggest money league. And Zach Ertz came up clutch in the championship game and delivered my crowning dagger. So I've been a big fan of Zach Ertz throughout his entire career. And I think, unfortunately, his career with the Philadelphia Eagles has come to an end. We still don't, as of the time of this recording, do not know who the new Eagles head coach is going to be. It's been rumored Josh McDaniels a lot out there, but I wouldn't be surprised if they throw a curveball at us and it's some guy we've never heard of. So Zach Ertz, a free agent this year. They've got Dallas Goedert under the rookie contract. They've got Richard Rodgers for really cheap right now, who was not supposed to be as productive as he was when he was on the field. So I don't think the Eagles pay Ertz's money right now. The Eagles themselves don't have much cap, and Zach Ertz just did not produce and was injured all season. So Zach Ertz is definitely going to have a new home this year. Right now he's going in the 10th round of Dynasty, which is not a good sign for his redraft value either. I think that Ertz might go a little bit earlier in redraft than he is in Dynasty, actually, but I still think, for a guy who's a top 4 tight end coming into this season, you look at Kelsey, Waller, Kittle, and maybe some of you had him above Mark Andrews. I personally didn't, so a top 5 tight end, rather, I think moves back closer to that top 10, top 12 range. He's definitely not in the top 5 anymore. Zach Ertz has taken a big step back, and I expect him to be nowhere near the player he was in his prime with Philadelphia. So that'll wrap up my top 10 guys I think will either rise or fall this year. I 100% will be doing another video like this very similarly very soon. I really enjoyed this style of a video and like just kind of free talking about different fantasy players and bringing up whatever I please about their games. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and turn that bell on so you guys are notified whenever I come out with a new video. And if you guys want some exclusive stats, data, and analysis from the SFS team, head over to my Patreon. Sizzle Fantasy Sports, and you guys will find some very interesting content over there. So if you guys are up for that, that'd be greatly appreciated. But otherwise, we'd love to have you around here on the channel and just tuning in for the videos. So I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.